Okay, and we're live. So just wanted to do a short video, giving some updates about what's happening. Some of you probably already know, but in New York, I think the number of confirmed cases is over 100,000, and in the city comprises about half of that. So there are around 50,000 or so people confirmed with coronavirus, and I think um, I think there are 2,900 deaths. I, and yesterday there were 600 in the state, so it was the highest death total. And of course, now you have the governor seizing. Hi, Irene. Hi, Jonathan. You have the governor seizing medical equipment and PPEs and face masks and ventilators, uh, equipment that's, according to him, not being used properly. So the state is essentially going around confiscating medical equipment from hospitals that they deem not to be using them correctly, or where they determine that they're not in use. Hi, Miss Bluebird. And we've already seen, like, we're kind of on a razor's edge here. You have governors and sometimes even mayors accumulating these dictatorial powers. So you have state authorities now just basically, hi Nathaniel, basically seizing things, confiscating things. They confiscated thousands of masks. Of course, they compensated the people at pre crisis levels, um, but still, it's kind of bizarre to be watching the government use the equivalent of eminent domain to just seize medical equipment. And one of the problems with this is the government is really not the best judge of allocating resources, and you see this whenever you look at a centrally planned economy, like in the former Soviet Union or in Cuba or Venezuela, which has been on the verge of collapse ever since Hugo Chavez died and oil prices tanked. But any sort of centrally planned economy, you always is a great illustration of how the government is not really capable of determining price points. They're not capable of allocating resources or 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 judging. They just don't have they don't have the input that each individual has when it comes to determining what the price of something should be. And I think this is just going to continue on and get progressively worse as the crisis escalates. Like I said, there were 600 people that died yesterday in New York, and over 100,000 confirmed. Um, so you have individual governors and mayors, state governments. I think there were only, I could be wrong, but I think there are 5 states now that don't have any sort of shelter in place order, or or statewide, or even local quarantines. I think North and South Dakota, and there might be a few others. Someone was telling me about Arizona, how Arizona has a statewide order, but it has a lot of loopholes that people are supposedly exploiting. But yeah, it's pretty much most of the country, and over four, I think I think 3.5 to 4 billion people. So the majority of people on the planet right now might be subject to some sort of government enforced quarantine. And the like I said, the problem is the government is not the best at determining how resources should be allocated. But there's also a bigger issue, and Peter Hitchens, um, yeah, that's another thing. Like a lot of the COVID-19 deaths, they're there are people who die with comorbidities, so they're saying he died with COVID-19, but in a lot of cases, like you had the playwright Terrence McNally, who was 81 and had all of these underlying health conditions. You had the famous folk musician John Prine is in ICU now, but you have to keep in mind this is someone who had throat cancer, I believe, and um, so I mean, COVID-19 is aggravating um, previous health conditions. So there's a lot of confusion as to what actually is causing these deaths, whether it's COVID-19 or that's simply something, um, whether they died from some sort of comorbidity like heart disease or diabetes. It's definitely worse for people who have respiratory problems or lung problems. But as I said, Peter Hitchens brought up a good point. One of the other problems is that the more agitation you have for the government collectivization, and you see this all over social media, the political class and the press corps, definitely they've been demanding that the government exercise more authority, not only over the economy and healthcare delivery, but virtually any sort of any sort of independence that people might have. I mean, like I said, the majority of the nation is under some sort of quarantine, and they just want to aggravate that situation. Like I think Anthony Fauci called for a national quarantine, which a lot of people were speculating was going to be imposed a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of this, and it's one of the problems. Peter just pointed out, the more you see this, the even if you believe this is effective from in arresting the virus, even if you believe, even from that perspective, you have to ask questions, because once you start disallowing dissent and you prevent people from openly questioning things, particularly opening uh, publicly questioning the government, you not only it's not just a question of encroaching upon your rights as a citizen, you also dilute the effectiveness of any sort of counter strategy to the epidemic, because when you live in a society where people can't ask questions or can't criticize, you you dilute the value of science. I mean, that's one of the core ideas of science, being able to question things, to examine things, to test hypotheses. And once you start policing thought, that pretty much goes out the window. So even from a purely utilitarian perspective, it's a bad strategy to squelch dissent, to start restricting how people can express their thoughts and what they can say and do. Even from a purely utilitarian perspective of mitigating the damage caused by COVID-19, it's a really bad strategy, because what you wind up with are these very docile, compliant scientists, quote unquote, who aren't really aren't really scientists. They're simply lackeys. They're government apparatchiks, and this is what you see when you look at the World Health Organization. and the United Nations, their quote unquote scientists, they're basically lackeys for the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government. Um, I think Sweden has a more relaxed policy. They're actually allowing they're allowing businesses to continue. As far as I know, it'll be interesting to see what happens, and it will be interesting to see what happens in the end to see whether that's more effective than these draconian, quarantines and stay-at-home orders. But yeah, that's basically what you wind up with. And a perfect illustration of this is Lysenkoism. So this was a pseudoscience that was adopted by the Soviet Union, the government, which imprisoned, I think, probably a few thousand biologists, or at least over 1,000 biologists who are, I'm not sure of the exact figures, but basically any biologist who questioned this faux science was put in a gulag, stripped of their job, and and persecuted because they pointed out that Lysenko, who wanted to divorce genetics and biology from agriculture, was a crackpot, that like he did not know what he was doing. He wasn't a real scientist. But the Soviet Union adopted this policy, and because it was accepted by Joseph Stalin, there was no alternative. You couldn't question it, and it led to disastrous. I mean, it was part of the reason why the Soviet Union experienced disastrous famines, in part. Uh, hi, Mark. Hi, Rexby. And people need to consider this. I mean, this was a great point by Peter Hitchens when he brought this up. People need to consider this when they say when you see these people who say we should rely upon experts and quote unquote experts to guide policy. And that anyone who questions them should be railroaded out of town. You have to consider what the eventual outcome of this would be, and it would be a form of scientific inquiry, which is basically people parroting whatever is the conventional, generally accepted wisdom, even if it's complete quackery, like Lysenkoism. Um, Yeah, in terms of YouTube, I would just urge people to, I mean, if they can, like, share this video, so that I know that, um, yeah, it's really hard for people who are not, for content creators, independent content creators, to actually get their message out on YouTube. One of the cool things was, David Wood, I think, celebrated his 1 millionth view, or 100 millionth, sorry, 100 millionth view for his channel, Act 17 Apologetics, which is a great apologetics channel, which has been around since, before, or around since September 11th, or somewhere around then. I've been watching his videos for years, not that long, but I would just urge everyone to watch. Uh, Go to Acts 17. It's a great channel. Hi, First Corinthians. I don't know the I know the people filing for unemployment. I think it's over 6 million. So yeah, it's pretty terrible. Yeah, the notifications come way. It's not just my channel. I've had that with even really popular channels. I know, uh, that I subscribe to. I've gotten notifications an hour or a half hour or even longer, half hour, an hour into the live stream, or the video. It's really funny. Yeah, but yeah, I just wanted to make this video to talk about that, this idea of not of accepting experts. This is I was reading from the Great Influenza for the past couple of videos, and that is a recurring theme. The whole and he describes this in the book, even though I didn't focus on that passage. He describes how progressivism tried to institute this bloodless technocracy uh, of rule by quote unquote experts, and you saw the results of what the results were: the bloodiest war in up to that point. Um, what one of the, and aside from the Civil War, like one of the bloodiest conflicts in U.S. history, a disastrous, basically the prolonging of a war that could have been resolved earlier, and the imposition of a terrible peace settlement that set the stage for the bloodiest conflict of the 20th century, and also a response to also exacerbating the greatest pandemic of the 20th century and one of the worst pandemics in history, the Spanish flu. So people can present themselves as experts, and all it means is that for the most part it's usually people who have ensconced themselves in the political firmament. And you see this particularly with these non-governmental organizations like the UN or the IPCC, which is responsible for the hockey stick graph. For those of you who are familiar with the Michael Mann hockey stick, and the promotion of policies based on the idea that anthropogenic global warming is an existential threat, and we need to short circuit our economies, at least Western economies, in order to arrest this threat to human civilization. But when you look at these people's credentials, they're not really scientists. They're political apparatchiks that have a a doctor at the front of their name. So, I mean, that's what rule by experts really is. It's not rule. It's not a meritocratic recognition of the smartest, the most intelligent people in a given country or in the world. It's really basically a rule by people who are parasites on the political system, and they just happen to be tangentially associated with the scientific field. So I think we should all think about that. I mean, that was a very, very salient point by Peter Hitchens. This idea that even from a purely utilitarian perspective, like you don't have to feel the same way as the late Nat Hentoff. You don't have to be a civil libertarian to understand that it's dangerous when you can't question things, question, when you can't pose questions or present ideas that contradict the established narrative. So I just thought I would talk about that for a little bit, and can hear sirens in the background. But I will see you all next time. And hi, Miss Piggy, and God bless. And I'll talk to you later.